I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there in the middle of my brother's engagement party, holding a tray of canapés like the hired help, while my sister-in-law-to-be clinked champagne glasses with my mother across the room and laughed at something I wasn't close enough to hear. That was the moment I decided. Not when my brother forgot to put my name on the guest list the first time and had to be reminded by his fiancée's mother. Not when my mother told me to dress down a little. You always make things about yourself. Not even when I found out, 3 weeks before the party, that the venue deposit had quietly come out of the joint account my mother and I shared for emergencies. $1,400 for a room I spent the evening serving drinks in. The moment was that laugh, the way my mother tilted her head back, completely relaxed, completely at home, without a single thought in the world about how any of this looked to me. I set the tray down on the nearest table. I walked to the bathroom. I sat on the edge of the sink and I looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. Then I pulled out my phone and I did the math. I should tell you who I am, or at least who I was then. 29 years old, senior project coordinator at a mid-sized construction consultancy in Mississauga. I'd been there 6 years, moved up twice, managed budgets that would make most people's eyes water. At work, I was the person people came to when something needed to actually get done. I kept spreadsheets the way other people kept journals. I knew where every dollar went. At home, meaning my family, not my apartment, I was the responsible one in the way that responsible actually means invisible. My brother Elliot was 2 years older and had never quite launched. He'd done 2 years of college, left, tried a landscaping business that folded, worked at a sporting goods store for a while, then landed a sales job at a car dealership that paid him inconsistently depending on commission. His fiancée Tatum was sweet but worked part-time at a spa and had no particular interest in building a financial cushion. My mother had been a single parent since my father left when I was 11. She'd worked hard for years. I won't take that away from her. But she'd also retired early, at 61, on a pension that covered her basic costs and not much else. And she had certain ideas about what her retirement should look like that weren't entirely compatible with what her pension actually provided. I had filled the gap, not all at once. That's never how it happens. It starts small. You cover a car repair because it's urgent. You quietly pay the difference when the hydro bill comes in higher than expected. You treat everyone at Christmas because it feels good and you can afford it. You co-sign something because it'll only be for a few months. You transfer a little extra because your brother sounds stressed, and you remember what it felt like to be stressed about money before you weren't. And then one day you're standing in a bathroom at a party you helped pay for, doing math on your phone, and the number at the bottom of the screen is $47,200. That's what I had given, transferred, covered, or absorbed over 4 years, not including the shared account, which I was the only one who ever deposited into, not including the Christmas gifts or the birthday dinners or the time I paid 2 months of my mother's internet because she forgot it was on auto pay from her old bank account and couldn't figure out how to switch it. $47,000, give or take. I went back out to the party. I smiled. I helped clear the dessert table. I hugged Tatum and told her the venue was beautiful, which it was. And I meant it, which I also did. I drove home and I sat at my kitchen table until 2 in the morning making a different kind of spreadsheet. Here's what no one tells you about being the financially responsible person in a family that isn't. They don't know. Or more precisely, they know in the vague, comfortable way that people know things they don't want to examine too closely. My mother knew I helped out. Elliot knew I was good with money. Tatum knew I was generous. But the actual number, the cumulative weight of it, I don't think any of them had ever sat down and added it up. I had. Now, the next morning, I called my financial advisor. I have one. I know that's not exciting, but it matters here. And I told her I wanted to restructure some things. She'd been nudging me for 2 years to stop co-signing and to close the joint account, and I'd always said soon. I said soon again, but this time I meant it in a different direction. I also called a lawyer. Not a fancy one. Just a general practice lawyer in Oakville who a colleague had recommended when I'd had a landlord dispute years earlier. I made an appointment for the following Thursday. I didn't tell anyone I was doing any of this. I went to work. I answered my mother's texts. I liked Tatum's engagement photos on Instagram. I sent Elliot a congratulations card with a Tim Hortons gift card inside, because that is the kind of normal thing a normal sister does. The lawyer appointment was useful. I wanted to understand a few things, specifically around the cosign on Elliot's truck loan, and whether there was anything I needed to do formally to protect myself there, and whether the joint account created any liability I hadn't thought about. The answer to the first question was not immediately, but here's what to watch for. The answer to the second was close it as soon as possible, and here's how to document that properly. I closed the joint account 2 weeks later. I transferred the balance, which was entirely my money, into my personal checking account. I sent my mother an e-transfer for $300 and a note that said, replacing what I took out of the shared account, I'm consolidating my banking. Hope that's okay. She replied with a thumbs up emoji. She didn't ask any questions. That told me a lot. The wedding planning started almost immediately after the engagement party, which is to say, the requests started almost immediately. The first one came from Elliot, casual, the way his requests always were. We were on the phone talking about nothing in particular, and he mentioned that he and Tatum were looking at venues and everything was a lot more than expected. I made a sound that was not a yes and not a no, and I asked him what his budget was. He said they hadn't really figured that out yet. I said that seemed like the place to start. He laughed. You sound like my accountant. You don't have an accountant, I said. Exactly. He was joking. I wasn't. The second request came from my mother 2 weeks after that. She called to tell me she'd found a perfect venue, a restored heritage hall in Burlington, the kind of place that shows up in wedding blogs, and that it was very reasonably priced at $6,000 for the space alone. She said she was going to look into it further, and wasn't it exciting? I said it sounded lovely. She called back the next day to say she'd done more research, and the venue required a non-refundable deposit of $2,000 to hold the date, and she was wondering if I could help with that just to secure it while they figured out the rest. I said I was actually in the middle of something at work and could I call her back. I did not call her back that day, or the day after. On the third day, she texted, just checking in, they need the deposit by Friday. I texted back, I've been thinking about it, and I'm not in a position to help with deposits right now. I'm doing some financial restructuring. Hope you find a great option. There was a long pause. Then, oh, okay. Nothing else. I put my phone face down and went back to my spreadsheet. Elliot called that weekend. I could tell from the first 2 seconds that my mother had briefed him. Hey, he said, with that particular careful tone people use when they're about to say something they've rehearsed. So Mom mentioned you're going through some financial stuff. I'm restructuring some things. Yeah, is everything okay? Everything's fine, I said. I'm just being more intentional with my money. He paused. Is this about the party? Because if it's about the venue cost, it's not about one thing, I said. It's about a lot of things over a long time. I've been thinking about it for a while. Another pause. I mean, we've always helped each other out. I didn't say anything, right? He said. I'm always going to be your sister, I said. I'm just not going to be your bank account anymore. He didn't take that well. The conversation ended shortly after, not with a fight exactly, but with that particular cold quiet that precedes one. He said he had to go. I said okay. He hung up. I sat with the discomfort of it for about an hour. That was new. Usually I would have already caved, already said I didn't mean it like that, already started softening the edges. Instead, I made tea and read a book and let the discomfort just be there until it wasn't so loud. What happened over the next 2 months was a kind of slow revelation, and not just for them. The first thing I noticed, they didn't actually need me as much as I thought. Or rather, they needed to not need me more than they needed me. Elliot and Tatum found a venue themselves, smaller than the Burlington Hall, a community space in Hamilton that they dressed up beautifully with rentals and DIY decor. It cost them a fraction of the original idea and honestly looked more personal and meaningful. My mother figured out her internet billing. It took her one phone call to her bank and 20 minutes on hold, and she sent me a surprisingly triumphant text about it afterward. Sorted it out myself. Not so hard after all. I sat with that text for a long time. 4 years. I had been transferring her that money for 4 years. The second thing I noticed, the temperature in my family dropped. Not dramatically, no one screamed at me, no one accused me of anything directly. But there was a chill. My mother's responses got shorter. Elliot stopped texting unless he needed something. I was still invited to wedding planning conversations, but I noticed I was invited later as an afterthought when the decisions had already been made. That hurt. I want to be honest about that. It hurt in a specific way that I hadn't expected. I'd told myself that setting limits would make things cleaner, more honest. I hadn't entirely accounted for the grief of it. The realization that some of the warmth had been transactional, that some of the closeness had been rented. I talked about it with my therapist, who I'd been seeing on and off for 2 years and who had, to her credit, never once told me what to do, but had asked me a lot of questions I didn't want to answer. She asked me if I thought the relationship had ever been genuine, separate from the financial piece. I said yes, I think so, in childhood, in certain moments. She asked me what I wanted the relationship to look like now. I said I wanted to be a sister, not a solution. She said that seemed worth working toward. The real rupture happened 6 weeks before the wedding. Elliot called me one evening, and I could hear Tatum in the background and the particular quality of the silence that meant I was on speaker without being told. He said they'd run into a problem. The caterer they'd booked had canceled. Some kind of licensing issue, and the replacement options they'd found were all significantly more expensive. The gap was around $3,200. He said he knew it was a lot to ask and that I'd been going through my financial thing. But this was different. This was the wedding. This was a one-time emergency. I asked if they'd looked into other caterers. He said they had, and these were the options. I asked if they'd considered scaling back the menu. There was a pause. I heard Tatum say something quietly. Elliot said that felt like a lot to ask their guests. I said, gently, I can't do $3,200, Elliot. He said, can't or won't. And there it was, the thing underneath all of it, finally out in the air. Both, I said. And I think you knew, somewhere, that this was coming. I think we've both known for a while that the way things were wasn't sustainable. I care about you and I want to celebrate your wedding, but I can't keep being the emergency fund. That's not a sister relationship. That's something else. He hung up. Tatum texted me an hour later. She said she understood where I was coming from, but that Elliot was really hurt, and could I reconsider just this once, given how important the wedding was. It was a kind text, actually, not aggressive, genuinely asking. I replied that I was sorry it had come at such a stressful time, that I loved her and was excited to be her sister-in-law, and that I hoped they found a solution. I also sent her the number for a local restaurant supply company I knew did catering at lower price points, with a note that they'd worked with my company for events before, and the food was genuinely good. They used it. The wedding catering ended up costing them $800 less than the original caterer had quoted, and the food, I saw for myself at the reception, was excellent. No one thanked me for the referral. The wedding was in October at a park pavilion in Bronte, with the lake behind them and the leaves just starting to turn. It was objectively beautiful. I stood in the family row, and I watched my brother cry when he saw Tatum walk toward him, and I cried a little too, because whatever was complicated between us, that moment was real. My mother spent most of the reception not speaking to me directly. She was warm with the guests, perfectly pleasant, but when our paths crossed, she was polite in the careful surface way that hurts more than coldness. At one point, we were both at the bar at the same time, and she said, "Are you having a nice time?" in a tone I recognized from the one time I'd gotten a B in grade 9 geography. I said yes. I asked if she was. She said, of course, in a way that meant something else, and moved away to find her friends. I let her go. 3 weeks after the wedding, I got a call from Elliot that was different from the others. He wasn't asking for anything. He sounded tired, actually tired, in a way I hadn't heard from him in a long time. He said, "I've been thinking about what you said, about it not being a sister relationship." I said I was listening. He said he'd gone back and looked at things. His own finances, what things had actually cost over the years, where the money had actually come from. He said he hadn't done the full math, but he had a sense of the shape of it now, and he felt sick about it. I said that wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want him to feel sick. I wanted us to be honest. He said, "I think I knew. I think part of me always knew, and I just didn't want to look at it directly." "I know," I said. "I let that happen too. I didn't say anything for too long. That's on me as much as it's on you." He asked what I wanted now. I said I wanted a brother who called me when something was good, not just when something was wrong. I said I wanted to come over for dinner sometimes, and not have the dinner feel like a transaction. I said I wanted our mother to talk to me like I was her daughter, and not her financial contingency plan. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's fair." We talked for another 40 minutes about nothing in particular. He told me about a hiking trail he and Tatum had found near Hamilton. I told him about a project at work that was giving me trouble. It was the most normal conversation we'd had in years. And when I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time just letting it settle. My mother came around more slowly. That's the honest version of this story. Not everything resolves cleanly. Not every person has the same conversation Elliot and I had. My mother is proud in a specific generational way that makes direct acknowledgement feel like defeat to her. And I have come to understand that waiting for the conversation I want to have may mean waiting for a very long time. What I got instead was smaller and, in its own way, enough. She started calling on Sunday evenings again, the way she used to before things got complicated. Not to ask for anything, just to talk. About her garden, about a documentary she'd watched, about the neighbor's new dog. Normal things. One Sunday she said out of nowhere, "I think I relied on you too much." I don't think I ever said thank you properly. I said, "Thank you matters, but it's not actually what I needed." She asked what I needed. I said, "To be your daughter, not your safety net." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I can try to do that." It wasn't a grand reckoning. It wasn't a dramatic apology. But it was real, and sometimes real is more useful than dramatic. I still have the spreadsheet. I look at it sometimes, not with anger exactly, more with the particular clarity of someone who finally knows the shape of something they used to only feel. My financial advisor at our last meeting pointed out that if I had invested that $47,200 instead of transferring it, at a modest return over 4 years, I would have somewhere between $56,000 and $61,000 right now. She said it matter-of-factly, without judgment, the way she says most things. I said I knew. She said, "Are you okay with that?" I thought about it. About the hiking trail Elliot mentioned, about the way my mother sounds now on Sunday evenings, about standing at the lake in October watching my brother cry. "I'm okay with what it taught me," I said. "I'm not okay with it happening again." She nodded and moved on to the next item in my portfolio. I have my own RRSP now, fully funded for the year. A TFSA with a 6-month emergency fund that nobody knows it about and nobody has access to. A budget I actually follow and a bank account with only my name on it. Last month, Elliot texted me a photo of the hiking trail. No context, no ask. Just the trail and the trees, a single line, "Thought you'd like this." I did. I saved it to my camera roll and I sent back, "Let's go sometime." He replied immediately, "Next weekend?" I said yes. That felt like the beginning of something. Not the story I thought I was in. Not the one where the responsible daughter quietly funds everyone else's life until something breaks. A different story. One where I'm actually in it.